H.R. McMaster, author and warrior, whose last job before retiring from the Army was director of the National Security Council in the Trump White House, and his friend Janan Mosazai, an Afghan diplomat. The General and the Ambassador on Uncommon Knowledge now. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Born in Philadelphia, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster graduated from West Point in 1984 and later earned a doctorate in American history from the University of North Carolina. His doctoral thesis was published as Dereliction of Duty: Johnson, McNamara, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Lies That Led to Vietnam. General McMaster served in the Gulf War, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. From February 2017 until this past April, General McMaster served as National Security Advisor to President Trump. A friend of General McMaster, Ambassador Janan Mosazai of Afghanistan, attended Kabul Medical University and Carleton University in Ottawa. After several years as a producer for the BBC, he joined the Afghan Diplomatic Service. Ambassador Mosazai served as spokesman for the Afghan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as ambassador to Pakistan, and most recently as ambassador to China. As of about a month ago, he has taken leave from the Afghan government and gone into the private sector. H.R. and Janan, welcome. After the terrorist attacks of 9/11, President George W. Bush decided to retaliate against the Taliban government of Afghanistan. The United States invaded Afghanistan on October 7, 2001. Some 14,000 American troops remain in Afghanistan to this day, more than 17 years later. H.R., summary statement. We'll get to details, but a summary statement. Why are we still there?
Well, we're still there because we have to be there to secure our vital interests. You mentioned the mass murder attacks on September 11th, 2001. We ought not to forget that the reason that this transnational terrorist organization, this enemy of all civilized people, was able to carry out such a sophisticated attack that murdered so many Americans and took so many trillions of dollars out of the American economy is because they had been given a safe haven and support base that allowed them to organize, plan, resource, generate revenue for, and apply that revenue to that sort of an attack. And so it's very important that these terrorist organizations not have that opportunity. There are over 20 designated terrorist organizations in that particular region.
Designated by us, by the
United States
government?
Designated by the United States,
okay.
Between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It involves Al-Qaeda, but other groups that are a grave danger, again, to really all civilized people, including ISIS Khorasan, for example. And so our vital interests are at stake there. But I would also say that there have been some tremendous achievements. I'll ask Janan maybe to talk about this because, really, it's important not just to conduct a successful military operation and then just leave, what you might call the George Costanza approach to war and just leave on a high note. You have to be able to consolidate those gains to get to a sustainable political outcome that addresses what brought you into that war to begin with. And so 14,000 troops is really, if you think about it, a very small number of troops compared to other operations that have been conducted that required a period of consolidation.
I believe, you'll know the number better than I, but I believe the number of troops we still have in Germany 70 years later is 30,000.
It's over 30,000.
So it's more than twice as many as in Afghanistan.
It fluctuates up to about 50,000 in South Korea. In South Korea, we kept 500,000 troops there for several years,
right?
And had 50,000 all the way through, the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. I'm not saying that it's going to take that much in Afghanistan. It's already not. And I think what's remarkable about Afghanistan, and also Janan maybe to comment on this as well, is the degree to which Afghans have clearly taken on the responsibility.
Okay, my opening question for you, Janan. Again, summary statement. We'll come back to all of this in just a moment. 17 years of foreign troops on your ground. Do Afghans still want us there?
Well, I think just to add to what H.R. has just outlined in terms of common interests, which is defeating terrorism and making sure that both Afghanistan is a peaceful country and a stable country, and that it's not a source of threats or risks to the United States or to any other countries, is also the question of common values, I would say. The United States has been a strategic partner to Afghanistan, to a new democratic Afghanistan. And I think that's extremely important, that it was demonstrated very vividly, once again, just a couple of days ago, by the people of Afghanistan, who braved bombs and bullets and risks and went out to vote for their next parliament.
As we shoot this took place just this past weekend.
This past weekend on Saturday and Sunday.
Not to be announced for some weeks, as I recall.
The results will come out, I think, maybe in a month's time.
Right.
3 weeks to a month's time, because all ballot papers and the biometric machines that were used have to be gathered up, brought back to provincial capitals, 34 provincial capitals, and then from there to Kabul, and then linked up with the central servers and databases that have been created by the electoral commissions, and then tallied up, verified, and then announced to the public. But it is both a question of a partnership of common interests, looking at it from a very concrete interests-based perspective, but it's also a partnership based on common values and America's support to a democratic Afghanistan. But I must also add that we have had difficulties in the past 17 years as well in the execution of the war.
Stop there. I want to get to that. No, I want to do a summary for listeners, because 17 years is a lot of ground to cover. And I don't see any way around it. I'm going to have to set it up quickly by going through the basic phases of the war. Operation Enduring Freedom, we go in 2001. We put special forces on the ground, small footprint on the ground, air cover, and work with Afghan forces, in particular the Northern Alliance, and the Taliban is gone in 2 months. Pretty remarkable, purely as a military matter, pretty remarkable accomplishment, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, light footprint gets the job done. Phase 2, we get about 7,000 troops in Afghanistan. President Bush, George W. Bush, calls for a new Marshall Plan. And in 2004, election in Afghanistan, new Afghan constitution. But then by 2005, phase 3 here, the Taliban begins returning to the country. By 2009, we've got NATO forces of about 32,000 and American forces of about 50,000. So we're up in the direction of 90,000 troops there. In late 2009, President Obama commits more troops. We get up to 100,000 troops. And then by 2011, President Obama's had about enough. And he starts announcing withdrawal timetables with the idea that we get out completely in 2014. And then negotiates with the Afghan government to leave a small force behind. Phase 4 we'll come to. That's what President Trump is choosing to do. But the point of this is we had a quick military victory using a very light footprint. And I have to say, as a layman, you'll be able to discuss this at greater length. As a layman, what's remarkable is that the United States military in real time learned on the ground. Small group, working with Afghans, calling an air cover, and they get the job done. And then the thing goes sideways for years. And we get a big force in, and now we're down to a small force. All right, now I'm trying to press a lot of ground material into a tiny amount of time here, but here's the basic question. Why can't we win? Why can't we just win, H.R.?
Well, the initial strategy was very successful militarily, but it was actually ran counter to the true nature of war, in that war is political. So what you're doing militarily has to be able to bridge into that sustainable political outcome. The Mujahideen-era militias, who we super-empowered with special forces, intelligence professionals, and air power, were able to effect essentially state capture over nascent state institutions and functions after the collapse of the Taliban regime. Of course, the Taliban had destroyed any institution we would have recognized as such anyway.
Right.
And so then these militias morphed into essentially organized crime networks that were affiliated with a criminal objective, but really a political objective, which was mainly to consolidate power in advance of a post-U.S. Afghanistan. And so remember, we have not had a 17-year plan, in Afghanistan. I mean, it's an old adage, but it's true. We've had 17 one-year plans, you could say. And so we kept saying, we're leaving. And so that idea that we're leaving right away encouraged a short-term maximization of gains mentality among these mujahideen groups who remembered the very destructive civil war from 92 to 96. If those conditions returned, they wanted to be in the greatest position of strength relative to the other groups. And so it really is the lack of a focus on the political nature of war that really led to many of the difficulties it experienced. But I would also say you have to recognize that in war, progress is never linear because of the continuous interaction with determined, capable, and in this case, brutal and ruthless enemies. The Taliban started regenerating in 2002, beginning of 2002, and they did so with the help of al-Qaeda. They could not have done it without al-Qaeda and Pakistani intelligence, the ISI. And they began regenerating almost immediately and began coming back in Afghanistan. This is by 2003,
faster than I understood. Okay,
much faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then what our response was,
and we knew that at the time. We could see it in real time.
And our response was still, hey, we're leaving. And so by the time of the 2006 elections, President Karzai looks over his shoulder. Who has my back? Well, they're leaving. I better cut a deal with the Mujahideen era leadership, the so-called warlords, so that in exchange for impunity and really a license to loot the state, you give me political fealty.
You get to run things in your fiefdoms, and I get to remain as president.
And so this exacerbated this problem of state capture by really criminalized patronage networks, and so the Afghan state and institutions associated with it were being hollowed out as we were trying to build them. And so this is just one of many examples of what Janan alluded to, which is that our strategy was not wise, right? And I do believe that in the past year, that's been rectified by President Trump's decisions. There is a fundamentally different policy and strategy in place in Afghanistan. But
so
Janan is really the real expert here.
Here's what I want to ask you. You spoke, I looked, the two of you did an interview together. It's available on YouTube. Anybody can go look at it in 2012. And you spoke about the expansion of political rights, spread of education, so forth. Here's the question. You've got a population of 37 million divided into 14 or so ethnic groups. I'm an expert on this because I looked it up on Wikipedia. Feel free to correct me if I get this wrong. And you've got, the country isn't consolidated into anything like a modern state until about the 1890s under Abdur Rahman, and it achieves autonomy. So we're not talking about France. We're not talking about Prussia, and we're not talking about England, countries that have been countries, some notion of a state for 1,000 years. We're talking about a mountainous region that has been run by local, tribal, or ethnic units until, in historic terms, the day before yesterday. So H.R. over here is saying we've got to set up a state, we've created the wrong incentives, but we can still do it. And I say this with respect, of course I do. You have to live there. But isn't he just asking too much too fast? Wouldn't it be good enough from the American point of view, and wouldn't it have brought peace to your country sooner if we just cut deals with the warlords? Here's the deal. Do what you want to do. Let your country live in peace and keep the Taliban out. That would have been good enough, right?
I don't think so.
All right.
Because if you look at the history of Afghanistan, it's a much older state than going back to the 1890s.
Right.
The Afghan Empire, going back to the 18th century, extended from New Delhi to Isfahan in Iran, and also Central Asia. So it was run.
And the capital was Kabul still?
Kandahar.
Kandahar. Right.
And then it was shifted to Kabul. And Afghanistan in the 1960s and the 1970s was a thriving Asian country, right in the heart of Asia, connecting Central Asia with South Asia and China with West Asia, and partly with the help of the American government. We were undertaking transformative infrastructure and development programs in Afghanistan
So there
in
is
the 60s and the 50s, 60s, and the 70s.
So there's a living memory of
There's
a coherent,
absolutely a stable,
stable state. There's something to get back to. This isn't a total act of invention. There's something to get back to.
a functioning state, a stable state, where people had rights and freedoms based on a very open constitution, which became the basis of the existing constitution of Afghanistan. This is the 1964 constitution, and it was revived in a different form in 2004, in 2003 in Afghanistan. So it's not that we're creating something completely brand new. We had that between 64 and 74. We went through a decade of democracy, an elected parliament, and the monarchy was modified.
What was the state of the country when the Soviets invaded in '79?
Well, the country was undertaking 5-year, very successful development programs. Increasing number of Afghan students were going abroad for education, including to the United States, the former Soviet Union, to other countries in the region. Afghanistan's trade with neighboring countries was expanding rapidly. The industrial base was getting up, highways, roads.
So the Soviets smashed a more or less successful state.
Well, the Soviet Union came and they smashed a functioning, stable state, and this is something that I wanted to mention as well. When we talk about Afghanistan, we're not talking about an Afghanistan that has gone through a 17-year war. It's a war that's been going on for at least 40 years. You could even say longer, because it probably started with the 1974 coup by the former king's cousin, which basically toppled the monarchy and then started the political
instability
turmoil.
that the Soviets exploited?
Well, the turmoil, they exploited it, and then Pakistan, the Pakistani army basically started supporting dissident Afghans with weapons and money in 1974. Not in 2000 or 2002 or in the 1980s.
This is a lot to fix, H.R.
I'd just like to make.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You finish, and I'll make two comments.
Then I want to get to President Trump.
Yeah, but I think two really important things happened. Two fundamental mistakes. One was that
we made,
that the United States made, and that we probably made together. That the United States took its eyes off Afghanistan in 2000, starting in 2002, right after the very quick military defeat of the Taliban, and started focusing on the invasion of Iraq. And so all the resources went to Iraq, all the planning capabilities and everything else went to Iraq, the intelligence capabilities, and Afghanistan was left to its own devices, number one. And two, we never dealt with Pakistan. Because if it were not for the sanctuaries and the support systems that were given to the Taliban in Pakistan, we would not have had the 17-year war. We would have had a much quicker, much more sustainable consensus on a peaceful Afghanistan. Afghanistan can never be a threat to the region. It's a smaller country. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country of 210 million people. On the other side, we have China. On the other side, we have Iran, much bigger, again, with a much bigger economy, much bigger military. And then we have the Central Asian Republic. So Afghanistan can never be a threat to these countries. And forging that consensus was not pursued in the early days. So that political solution was ignored. And that's what we need to focus on right now.
All right.
We have the beginning of that.
President Trump, August 2017, you're his national security advisor at the time, and he gives a big speech on Afghanistan. And I would like simply to quote a few passages from the speech and have you comment. Good idea in the first place. How have we done so far? President Trump, after meetings over many months, I arrived at three fundamental conclusions. First, our nation must seek an honorable and enduring outcome worthy of the tremendous sacrifices that have been made. Close quote. Now, you know what a layman like me says? That sounds like the fallacy of sunk costs. That economists or people are always doubling down on bad investments because they feel they already have so much invested. This is not a good idea.
Well, actually, it's not a bad investment, and it is a good idea. And the reason is that consider what happens if you don't make that investment. Think of it as investment, but also think of it as insurance. Insurance against a return of these murderous groups who want to kill our children and who did commit mass murder on American soil in 2000.
It's not speculative.
They did it. It's not speculative. And also think about the psychological victory. If, for example, groups like ISIS or Al Qaeda or their Taliban compatriots, and this is one of the myths of the Obama administration, is that there's this bold line between the Taliban and Al Qaeda. It's simply just not true. I mean, if you just one example of this is in Shorebach Farms down in Kandahar, the largest Al Qaeda training base ever identified in history was struck by U.S. Army Rangers and Afghan Special Forces.
And the year here is?
This is 2015. And the whole area of about 30 square kilometers was administered, staffed, run by the Taliban. I mean, Osama bin Laden's son is in command of a Taliban unit, to build up his reputation as a successor within the Al Qaeda organization. And so it's extremely important to understand the facts, and I think many Americans have this impression it's been so long, therefore it's impossible. In fact, Afghanistan doesn't need to be, as you mentioned, France or Prussia. It just needs to be Afghanistan. And the vast majority of Afghans don't want the Taliban. Think about what the Taliban did in the period from 96 to 2001. Afghans remember that. Kabul had shrunken down to a city of 500,000 because where did the population go?
Yeah.
They fled to Pakistan.
And now it's up to?
It's
5 million.
It's
5 million.
over 5 million.
Yeah.
Over 5 million.
More than 5 million.
And so there are these myths about the war. One of the myths is that despite this vast investment in blood and treasure, that nothing has been gained in Afghanistan. It's simply not true. The other is that that
What
really
has been gained? I mean, from our point of view, we haven't been hit again.
That's right.
Right. But beyond that, that's a kind of negative. This has not happened. What has happened that's good?
Maybe I can
Sure.
jump
Yes.
in there. But I mean, Afghanistan is a transformed country right now. Whether you look at the growth or the regeneration of democratic governance, yes, with its flaws, there are difficulties and challenges that we've had, and also setbacks. But Afghanistan is now an open society. It's a country where people have the right to speak their minds. We have the most open, the most rambunctious media sector in the entire region, and it's recognized by international institutions that assess media freedom around the world, and we are very proud of that. The young generation in Afghanistan is playing an extremely important role, whether it's in governance or in the economy or in politics. The majority of candidates, for example, for parliamentary elections just a few days ago were young people, both as candidates and also as voters. Afghanistan's economy has been regenerated. The country was in complete ruin in 2001, and now Kabul is a city of 5 million. It's thriving. The infrastructure has improved exponentially in the country, but not just in the major cities, but throughout the country. Rural development has been a big achievement in Afghanistan. Healthcare services. In 2001, we had fewer than 1 million kids going to schools. All of them
In 2001.
2001. All of them, male children. But now we have around 10 million kids, probably more, going to schools. About 40% of them girls. Hundreds of thousands of young people going to universities. We had maybe fewer than 10 universities in 2001, and there are more than 100 now throughout the country, public universities, private universities, and businesses all over the place. Afghan businesses are now expanding and playing an increasingly important role even in the region, in the Gulf states and Central Asia, even in South Asia. So Afghanistan is a country that is much more closely linked with the region and with the world, whether it's in terms of trade or diplomacy and all the rest.
So we haven't gotten hit, and you've had a chance to rebuild.
Yeah,
Yes.
but and I must say this, we have to have a different approach to the war.
Okay, so
Let me
quote President
the military
Trump again.
approach will not get us anywhere.
I'd like to point out one other thing, though.
Go ahead.
You mentioned the President Obama's decision to send more troops, but I think it's important to recognize that he gave a withdrawal timeline at the same time as he sent those troops. War, as I mentioned, is an extension of politics. You have to focus on a political outcome, but war is also a contest of wills, right? And in war, each side tries to outdo the other. If you commit forces to war and don't try to win, you put yourself at a severe disadvantage. And then also, because just war theory that we learned from Thomas Aquinas tells us that a requirement for a war to be just is to have defined
prospect of victory.
a just end,
Yes,
a
right.
just end in mind. And so what we had is a broad number of years during which we were fighting a war without direction, without clearly articulated goals, objectives that could galvanize us, and us, I mean,
There was
the
no
United States and
long-term
allies.
vision and
There
no
was
end
no
state.
long-term vision.
And no end state.
And so this idea, this really hubristic idea, narcissistic idea that you can announce years in advance exactly the number of troops you're going to have, how narrowly circumscribed their role. We actually said the Taliban was no longer a declared enemy. I mean, the forces that were committing mass murder against Afghans, killing our soldiers and killing Afghan soldiers, were not a designated enemy during these years. And again, was this pipe dream of an easy out, to tell the enemy, hey, we're leaving.
Your criticism is bipartisan because it applies not only to
Absolutely.
Barack Obama, but the aimlessness applies to
Absolutely.
George
The
W.
whole
Bush.
span of that war. The whole span of that war.
Okay, here is, now hearing you speak, I have a feeling that as National Security Advisor, you must have written this line in yourself. President Trump, quote, "We will fight to win," close quote.
Yeah.
We will fight to win. So, okay, now let me be the layman. First of all, you guys have to tell me what is the end state? What is this going to look like? Tell the American people what victory will look like. Two, HR, you just told me how modest our force is. How many do we need to win? Either go in to win or get the heck out. That, I think, is, to many Americans, that's the lesson of Vietnam. Win it or get out. And then three, I'm stacking up the questions here for you guys to address. Then I'll just sit back and let you do it. Three is, wait a minute. If all we did was push them over to Pakistan, and now the problem of safe haven isn't solved, it just resides someplace else, good Lord. When we occupied Japan for 7 years after the war, there were no neighboring countries to which discontented Japanese troops could retreat. And then Germany was totally defeated, there were no Nazis crossing borders threatening to re-enter. Pakistan is right there. Why haven't we dealt with Pakistan? Okay, HR.
Okay.
Go at it. Go at it.
We'll take these one at a time. I'll say, first of all, what does
What's
winning look like?
Yeah, what's it winning? What does
winning
it look
again
like?
is a sustainable outcome consistent with our vital interests, which means that Afghanistan is a country that is stable, that is relatively secure. It's not going to be completely secure. As again, I said, we're not trying to. Our aspiration is not that Afghanistan becomes Switzerland; it's that it becomes Afghanistan, and that it denies any kind of a safe haven and support base for those who want to do us and all civilized people harm. I mean, in many ways, we ought to think about Afghanistan as a modern day frontier between civilization and barbarism. And so that's a sustainable political outcome. And in fact, I mean, I think you could say, well, what if you just say that we've won already? With 11,000 troops there, with our ability to sustain that commitment with more burden sharing, from allies and partners. At the height of the war, you already mentioned, 160,000, 130,000 troops in Afghanistan.
Big
annual expenditures of about $112 billion a year. Now, 11,000 soldiers, annual expenditures of $22 billion a year. A number that could shrink because I think our European allies, others, can do more because if Afghanistan does collapse, which it's not going to, but if it did, those refugees would not come to the United States.
Right.
I mean, they would go to Europe and elsewhere. So I think that because when America leads, others will follow and do more. And so I think this is already a sustainable multi-year strategy, which we didn't have before. But I'd like to ask Janan, what is your vision of what is winning?
That's right. What does winning look like to
one
Afghans?
thing that we lacked in the for several years was a vision of the kind of Afghanistan that we want 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now.
Okay, this is
well, in Afghanistan in general,
right.
Afghanistan and also our friends in the United States. But now we have that vision clearly enunciated by President Ghani, and also it's one that is supported by the people of Afghanistan. And that's an Afghanistan that is at peace with itself, and that is a land bridge in the heart of Asia region for trade, for the flow of goods and people, and that is a platform for regional and global cooperation on important issues of dealing with security, dealing with economic issues, dealing with
peace and trade. I'll buy that.
Peace and trade, and we can achieve that. But we can achieve that if we have consistent adherence and pursuit by the U.S. administration, by the U.S. government, of a political and diplomatic approach. Not just with Afghanistan, but involving Afghanistan's neighbors and the key regional powers. Because without engaging countries like China and Russia and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and even Iran, which is an important neighbor to Afghanistan, it will be extremely difficult to address even the security aspect of the situation in Afghanistan. But these countries that I mentioned,
every time I think you're giving me a problem that's solvable.
It is solvable. Because
then you add layers that we have to get along with the Chinese, the Russians. And
it's not easy.
No, let's come to them.
Diplomacy
Pakistan,
is not,
start with Pakistan. As you yourself said, 220 million people and they have nukes.
No, but if I could.
Go ahead.
These countries, all of them that I mentioned, they also have common interests with us in Afghanistan and even with the United States, which is defeating terrorism, because they're also afraid of the leakage of the violent extremism virus into their own societies, into their countries. China is concerned, Central Asian republics are concerned, Russia is concerned, narcotics is a big concern for them. The whole question of refugees, it's not just the European countries that are concerned about this, but our neighbors and countries in the region.
Why us? Why don't we leave Afghanistan?
Well, because
the Chinese?
I think the United States has interest. I mean, if Central Asia is an important region, if South Asia is an important region, if the Middle East is, and West Asia in general is an important region for U.S. interests on the global stage, then you have no choice. If China is important, Afghanistan is a next-door neighbor of China as well. Then the United States will be very wise to have a long-term strategy of engagement with Afghanistan. Not a military strategy.
You see my problem. You make sense,
Yeah.
and then it starts to slip away. Wait a minute. George W. Bush, the rap on George W. Bush, particularly in his second inaugural, where he said, I've got it here somewhere, let me find it. It is the policy of the United States to seek and support the growth of democratic movements and institutions in every nation and culture, with the ultimate goal of ending tyranny in our world. We're not done until the whole world is a democracy.
Yeah.
That's George W. Bush. Here's Donald Trump speaking once again in that speech that you were involved in, quote, "We are not nation building, we are killing terrorists," close quote.
Yeah.
So, doggone it, HR. You lay something out that makes sense,
Yeah.
and then it starts to get bigger, and suddenly we can't succeed in Afghanistan until we succeed everywhere, and we're right back in the same intellectual pickle.
Okay, well, I think there's a clear explanation of this by looking at this broad sweep of 17 years. And during this 17-year period, really 15-year period, if you discount the adjustments that President Trump made to really put in place for the first time a sound approach, at the beginning of these wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, we were over-optimistic, right? I mean, we always debate about the war in Afghanistan to a certain extent, but the debate about Iraq is always, should we have done it? Mm. I think the debate ought to be, who the hell thought it was going to be easy? And why did they think it would be easy? Mm-hmm. And so we swung from sweeping statements like the one you quoted and over-optimism associated with those statements to defeatism, I think, under the Obama administration, in which they believed that our disengagement from these problem sets was an unmitigated good because they were intractable problems, they were futile endeavors. And so this gets to your second question you asked at the outset of this part of the discussion. We see what it looks like when you disengage completely from these problem sets before you're able to consolidate gains and get to a sustainable outcome. We saw that in Iraq in 2011. And so what happened is you had the bleed over of the Syrian civil war, the rise of ISIS, and almost the collapse of the Iraqi state in a way that would have super empowered this ISIS group. And so it's worth it to be able to sustain your effort to get to that outcome and to define that outcome clearly. It's clear that we're able to do that. And Janan has already mentioned some of the essential elements of success, all of which I think are feasible. There's an internal political Afghan dynamic that is very important, and that's really helping Afghans come together around a vision for the country in which they believe their interests will be advanced and protected. But there's also an external political dynamic associated here. And this is one of the fundamental differences in the approach that President Trump took,
Right.
which was a fundamentally different approach to the problem set of Pakistan. And so Janan was the ambassador there. I think it was well past time for the United States to put aside these contradictions in our approach to Pakistan and not allow really Pakistan any longer to have it both ways, to pose as a major non-NATO ally while it aids and abets terrorist organizations and the Taliban such that they continue to destabilize our ally in Afghanistan, as well as kill Americans. And so
President Trump again, we have been paying Pakistan billions of dollars at the same time they're housing the very terrorists that we're fighting. That will change immediately. How has it changed? He spoke a year ago.
I mean, the president demands results, right, and action. And so we implemented his strategy on South Asia. So what the other aspect of this, which is important, this was a speech on a South Asia strategy as well. And so, and you mentioned this as well, why not just leave it to China? Why not just pull out and so forth? And the reason is our interests are in a stable Afghanistan, but they're also, we have tremendous interests in that region as well. It's a region that has tremendous promise, but it's also a region that's really fraught with tremendous danger, especially in connection with what Janan already mentioned, a nuclear-armed Pakistan, but also a nuclear-armed India and the enmity between those two countries. China, as you know, is a sponsor of the Pakistani state. And I believe, and we started to mention, and I'll ask you to comment on Pakistan here, I don't believe that it's in any Pakistani's interest, whether they're in the army or in the civilian government or in the ISI, to be the next North Korea and to be completely isolated with a single state sponsor. Pakistan doesn't want that. And so Pakistan has to recognize that there are going to be consequences for its behavior if it continues to support these terrorist and groups in the Taliban.
Why have they been playing this double game with us for so many years in the first place?
Okay.
Is that a religious fundamentalism? Is there an ideological component? There are actually elements within Pakistan that genuinely favor the Taliban and that are on the other side, so to speak?
Well, I'm going to ask Janan to comment on this as well, and also I'll be super succinct with this, I hope, is how you get succinct about Pakistan's motivations. But what I will say is that Pakistan is a country that was born in a time of fear and has remained fearful since that time. The Pakistanis, and I don't mean to be trite about this, they see an Indian behind every tree. And one of the reasons why they fear an Afghan state that is aligned with India is they believe that they would be encircled, and therefore they would lose what they would call, in their arguments they call strategic depth. The other aspect of this has to do with...
So they want a weak Afghanistan.
They want a weak Afghanistan where they want a say in the future of Afghanistan. What we need to say to them, you can have that say diplomatically, and you can be a lot more effective diplomatically than you are by supporting terrorist and insurgent groups. 2/3 of the ethnic Pashtun population is in Pakistan. And so another fear is that a Pashtun nationalist movement in Afghanistan would destabilize Pakistan and therefore, leave Pakistan with a rump state as a portion of Pakistan is ceded to a Pashtunistan of some kind. The other concern besides India and besides, a Pashtun nationalist movement is that this is what the ISI has done since the 1980s. It's almost like the Geico commercial. When you're the ISI, you support the Taliban. It's what you do. Or you support terrorist groups. And so, there's a book called The Shade of the Swords, that essentially says that really the sustained effort against India and in support of these groups is the raison d'etre of the Pakistani army. And so it's just very difficult for them to divest of what they've done for decades. But this is the real expert who's lived there, and I'll ask you to...
No, I'll just highlight, I think, the fact that the Pakistani, it's not the whole of Pakistan that wants an unstable Afghanistan, that wants an Afghanistan that is in turmoil, that is weak. It is the Pakistani army and it's not the whole military even. It doesn't include the Air Force and the Navy, who don't have any say when it comes to Pakistan's foreign policy vis-a-vis Afghanistan or India or many other countries, including the United States. It's the army and the intelligence agency of Pakistan, the so-called ISI. And so if you have those people in charge of foreign policy towards Afghanistan, they will always militarize it, and everything will look to them as a military target. And the elected civilian government in Pakistan has had no power, no authority to make decisions with regards to its relations with Afghanistan, and they want peace with Afghanistan. We know that for a fact. The former prime minister, who was ousted by the military, was in favor of peace with Afghanistan and trade and close relations. And
this is why he was ousted in large
This is why he was ousted. And he also wanted the same positive relations with India, and that's why he was ousted. So what we have said to the Pakistanis repeatedly is that you don't have to sponsor militant groups and terrorist groups to keep Afghanistan weak. Come and support peace in Afghanistan, and you will be the closest strategic and political and trade partner to Afghanistan, because we are naturally, we complement each other. Because there's so many commonalities between.
It just happened
It will be a relationship like
one
between Canada and the United States.
You made all the sense in the world, and then Janan starts talking. You and Janan start talking about the motivations in Pakistan, and it goes back to 1948 and the partition with India, and I'm just like, whoa, this is too complicated for us Americans. Leave it to them.
If I may, I'll just bring it back to what and expand a little bit on what H.R. was just saying, and we have to give credit to this man here for, expanding that lens of American policy towards Afghanistan and the broader region, and situating Afghanistan within a larger context, which you must do, because Afghanistan is impacted by the policies and positions of its neighbors. It's a landlocked country, and it's a country that is suffering from an imposed war right now with sanctuaries and safe havens outside. So you have to have a broad strategy that includes all the key regional players, and he achieved that with his support to President Trump's revision of America's approach to Afghanistan and the South Asia strategy. Now, that has to be pursued with vigor, with patience.
For how long?
I suppose for as long as it takes. But what I can tell you
at a sustainable level of commitment.
What I can tell you is that it has a very strong chance of success, because there is a confluence of key interests between the United States and almost all the other states in the region on a peaceful, stable Afghanistan that is not a source of threats to the United States or to those countries, and that is a contributor to peace, stability, and economic development in the broad region. And I say that because we want to expand the Afghanistan-U.S. relationship from a purely military partnership, which is important, security partnership, which I think is important, to a more comprehensive partnership, where the economic element is the biggest. Where
you want some investment.
Where we have
Central and South Asia is the least integrated
region in the entire
world economy.
In the entire world.
And you have a growing Indian economy that is thirsty for energy resources. You have tremendous energy resources in Central Asia. You have this idea of Afghanistan as the Central Asian roundabout, and that's what, and the connector. So this is a long-term vision, right? I mean, this is not.
So let me ask you. So isn't the logic of your position, which again, every time you talk, H.R., you persuade me, for a moment at least. But isn't the logic of your position a permanent American presence, just like the presence in South Korea and just like the presence in Germany? And
it doesn't have to be military presence.
If that's the price, okay, maybe. But are the Chinese going to put up with an American military presence permanently that close to? Are the Russians going to be happy about that? Will the Iranian? I mean, is that really where it comes out? This is just open-ended, and we need at least a small presence there indefinitely.
Well, yes, and it doesn't have to be 14,000. It doesn't have to be a certain number. But as Janan was alluding to as well, it's not just a military engagement. It's diplomatic engagement. It's economic engagement. One of the greatest mistakes we made in Iraq is when we withdrew all of our troops. We lost, obviously, access and visibility to dynamics in certain parts of the country, but we also disengaged diplomatically from Iraq. So in Iraq, as an example, a man named Iyad Alawi won the 2010 election, but the Iranians maneuvered to have that invalidated and to extend the prime ministership of Maliki, whose then sectarian policies polarized that community. So this goes to your second question again. We learned, I think, from disengagement in Iraq in a way that's analogous to Afghanistan. Now, of course, what we want Afghanistan that can sustain itself. And that's what's happening. That transition is happening. The Afghan security forces are bearing the brunt of every battle. Every battle. And these are extremely courageous people. One of the misunderstandings you often hear about Afghanistan is, well, nobody's ever conquered Afghanistan, and the Afghans have defeated any power that's been there. It misses completely the point that we're fighting alongside Afghans to help them secure their future against a brutal, murderous, terrorist organization whose agenda is destroy all the girls' schools, start committing mass assassinations and executions in the soccer stadiums again, right? Get rid of any kind of culture and music, and we know what their agenda. We know what their agenda is, right?
And then come after us,
and then of course come after us, and any country that would adhere to the belief that in modernity, in individual rights and rule of law, and so there has been unleashed in Afghanistan tremendous potential. It will be up to the Afghans to determine whether they can take that opportunity. But it will be up to not just us, but sustained international commitment to help the Afghans, because Afghanistan will be in need of international assistance for the foreseeable future. And I'd like to just ask you to entertain one analogy quickly, which is imperfect. I'm a historian, so I'm skeptical about the use of historical analogies. But look at the prospects of South Korea in 1953, a country ravaged by decades of war,
close to starvation,
brutal occupation, no natural resources. I mean, the country was denuded of any kind of trees or foliage, an illiterate population, a corrupt government, and a hostile neighbor that continued to try to destabilize the South. I mean, in the period 1966 to 69 in Korea, we took more casualties there along the DMZ than we did this year in Afghanistan, for example. So I think then compare that to South Korea today, right? Which is an extraordinarily successful country, a country that has been an engine of economic growth and trade and development in Northeast Asia and around the world. And so there are no short-term solutions to long-term problems. Right? The key is, how do we sustain a commitment at a level that is acceptable to the American public in our democracy?
If I can just build on what HR was just saying. Briefly.
Yes, go ahead.
Because I think this is very important. I think it is possible for us to forge a peace settlement with the Afghan Taliban. The Afghan people will never allow a return to 1996 or to 2001 prior to the collapse of the Taliban regime, because the country has moved forward from that past. But it is possible to reach a political settlement with the Taliban so that they become part of the constitutional order in Afghanistan, so that they do not pose any threats to the achievements of the Afghan people, so that Afghanistan is not a source of threats to the United States or to our neighbors. And the signals that we are getting from the Taliban now, from their senior leadership, not all of them, but at least from the senior leadership, is that they're prepared for a deal with the Afghan government, with the United States. And I think that is something that has to be pursued single-mindedly, again,
just
in
spent
concert.
The show talking about these people as barbarians,
yes,
and now your friend Janan is saying we'll do a deal with them.
There are irreconcilable elements that are bent on fighting to the end. So I'm not saying that 100% of the anti-government militant forces and insurgent forces will come and reconcile and become part of a peaceful order. There will always be segments and pockets of those anti-government forces that will die to the end, and they have to be opposed militarily, but by the Afghan government, the Afghan national security and defense forces. But I believe that the majority of the Taliban leadership and the majority of their fighters, who are hired guns, who have picked up a gun because they're too poor. I mean, they get paid to go and carry out attacks, that they can be reintegrated integrated into the constitutional order. And that can only be done through the pursuit of a political diplomatic approach, which has been outlined by President Trump with support from HR, and which requires a lot of hard work. And now we have a special envoy for Afghanistan reconciliation appointed by President Trump. And I believe that if he and his team, if they go about this job with dedication and diligence and hard work, you know, that we can achieve reconciliation and peace in Afghanistan in the next couple of years.
And the one quick point is what Janan is saying is these groups are not monolithic or homogeneous.
They're not.
And under the previous administration, there was really this strange effort to say, to bifurcate and to separate what we're doing diplomatically from what we're doing militarily. I think one of the most significant differences in the South Asia strategy was the integration of what we're doing militarily with what we're doing diplomatically. If you tell,
now, in this administration,
if you tell the Taliban, hey, we'd like to negotiate a settlement with you, and we're leaving, by the way, how does that work? It doesn't work. So, but if you say we are committed to achieving a sustainable outcome consistent with our interests, then what you're doing is encouraging elements of the Taliban to conclude that they can only effectively advance their interests through some sort of participation in a political process.
We're not going home. We can talk or we can fight.
It's a right.
Got it.
And to basically marshal the region in support of that strategy, because the region can help us put the necessary pressure on Pakistan to end its support to the Taliban and shut down the sanctuaries. And support peace.
One last question for each of you. In the elections that took place this past weekend, there were 27 people killed, 100 were wounded.
More than
more
27,
now.
Yeah. Or close to 50.
All right, and in Kabul, unfortunately, there are still suicide attacks taking place. Imagine that you had the chance to talk to some 19-year-old Taliban kid just before he put on the suicide vest, and you had just a moment to tell him why he should leave the Taliban and join the new Afghanistan. What would you say?
Well, that a 19-year-old is told, the Taliban, would-be suicide bomber, is told that you put on the suicide vest, go and blow yourself up because you will be serving the cause of God. You will be fighting anti-Islam forces. You'll be fighting a puppet regime. And I would tell him that that's absolutely not true. That Afghanistan is an Islamic republic. Its constitution is based on the tenets of the holy religion of Islam, of the Quran. That it's 100% consistent with Islamic Sharia law, which allows for equal rights for men and women, the participation of women in public life, their education, and democratic governance, and that he has been brainwashed, and that his future is in a peaceful, stable, open Afghanistan, and that he should choose that path, instead of ending his life and also the lives of many others.
Okay, H.R., you're not only the warrior scholar with an important book to your credit, you also have a reputation for caring a lot about the kids in boots. You're that famous tank battle that you commanded where you destroyed, more than 5 dozen Iraqi tanks and took not a single casualty in your own unit. Okay, you've got some 19-year-old American kid who's just found out he's going to be deployed to Afghanistan, and he's thinking, but he's not going to say it to your face, you know he's thinking, General, what the heck are we doing over there?
That's not what he's thinking.
It's not?
No. And so what we owe our soldiers, right? I mean, soldiers don't want to be viewed as victims, right? Soldiers don't want to be pitied. What soldiers deserve is the ability to understand how the risks that they take and the sacrifices they may be called on to make are contributing to an outcome worthy of those risks and worthy of those sacrifices. That is one of the reasons why, going to war without a real strategy to achieve that sustainable outcome is not only unwise, but is also, I think, unethical in terms of the responsibilities for those soldiers. I think there were broad periods of time, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where soldiers were unable to really meet that test, that true test of whether or not you have a sound strategy. I believe in Afghanistan they can now. And one of the meetings that we arranged with President Trump with 4 young soldiers so that he could gain
Our
their
soldiers.
perspective, our soldiers, and this is in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing, and he said, do you want to be there? Every one of them said, yes, Mr. President, we want to be there. He said, why? He said, we want to be there because I want to make sure that my son or my grandson doesn't have to go back and fight another war in Afghanistan. And so really what is important to understand, I think, what are the risks and what are the costs of action or sustained commitment? But to balance that against what are the risks and the costs of inaction? And so I believe that's what convinced the president. I mean, it wasn't my job or anybody's job to advocate for our position on this. What the president demanded when he made this decision is multiple options. And he carefully weighed the advantages and disadvantages of each of those options, including what you might call a withdrawal option, which was really the policy of the Obama administration, was withdraw. And so I think that the president made a courageous and right decision on the South Asia strategy. And I believe, as Janan has said today, that we have a very strong chance for success and, in fact, may have already succeeded, depending on how you describe what ultimately we have to endeavor to achieve there.
Ambassador Janan Mosazai, General H.R. McMaster, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge and the Hoover Institution. Thanks for joining us.